So we have a critical reasoning question. A couple of things that you want to think about with critical reasoning. Number one, stay in the scope of the passage. The answer's in there. It's not anything else that you're thinking about. Number two is, depending on the question, you have a couple of strategies to take. So this question in particular, the argument is most vulnerable to which of the following criticisms? Well, it says an argument, so that means that there's a conclusion. It says criticism, so you know that we are trying to weaken or find the flaw or the gap in the argument. So here we says it is theoretically possible that bacteria developed on Mars early in its history and that some were carried to Earth by a meteorite. However, strains of bacteria from different planets would probably have substantial differences in protein structure that would persist over time. And no two bacterial strains on Earth are different enough to have arisen on different planets. So, which is indicative of the conclusion, even if bacteria did arrive on Earth from Mars, they, the bacteria, must have died out. So that's the argument. Bacteria, even if they did arrive on Earth from Mars, even if it came from Mars, that bacteria must have died out. Why do they think that? They think that because no two bacterial strains on Earth are different enough to have arisen from different planets. So what they're thinking is they're not different enough to make the conclusion that they're from different planets. So even if they came from Mars, they must have died out. And they talked a little bit about Mars early in its history and the bacteria developing there, and some of the bacteria being carried by a meteorite. So where is the gap? That's what we're looking for. A says it fails to establish whether bacteria actually developed on Mars. Well, the argument doesn't really dispute whether bacteria was developed on Mars. In fact, the premise says bacteria developed on Mars early in its history. So that's not really the argument here. B says it fails to establish how likely it is that Martian bacteria were transported to Earth. It's not about likelihood. In fact, it also just discusses it can be carried by a meteorite to Earth. So it's not about how it got there. It's about whether the two strains are different enough. And if that's true, then those strains must have died out. C says it fails to consider whether there were means other than meteorites by which Martian bacteria could have carried to Earth. That's out of scope, not even a part of the argument. D says it fails to consider whether all bacteria now on Earth could have arisen from transported Martian bacteria. Okay, so all bacteria now on Earth could have arisen from transported Martian bacteria. I'll hold on to that one. And E says it fails to consider whether there could have been strains of bacteria that originated on Earth and later died out. So the argument is not about what originated on Earth. It's about what originated on Mars. And D says it fails to consider whether all bacteria now on Earth could have arisen from transported Martian bacteria. Because if that's the case, then even the different strains, then that point is mute. If they are different enough, but they all came from Mars, that means that Martian bacteria could also do what this argument is saying it does, which is get different enough from different planets. So D would be our answer here.